Well, hello there. If you're here, if you're listening to this podcast, then you or a loved one probably has a problem. I'm very sorry to hear that you have the problem, but you are very brave to seek out or even think about seeking out help. I wish you luck on your journey. My hope for this podcast, and I will admit I only have a vague plan for where it's going, is to be a companion piece for your therapeutic journey. The world of therapy in mental health, or if you prefer the term industry, is big. It's complex. It's often disorganized. It can be very overwhelming, and a lot of the times, people need help with just the world of mental health in of itself. I will often spend a lot of time with clients talking about the world and resources and how therapy is done. So who am I to make such a podcast? That's a fair question, and I'm going to start with professional credentials. I'm a licensed clinical social worker. I graduated with my Master's of Social Work in 2018, and I spent around the first 5 years in the public schools. After that, I moved to private practice therapy. There was a bit of an overlap. I used to work in school and do private practice on the side. In addition, I've had my own mental health journey. It's an ongoing journey. I wish I could say it was over, but it is being managed. And that is something that happens a lot in mental health. The problem isn't managed, but not cured. I have seen multiple specialists over the years, I have been involved with multiple programs, and that's kind of all I wish to disclose today. But needless to say, I have been both in the therapist chair and in the client's chair. Many of the things I'm going to say may bring up criticism from other therapists, or may differ from your own personal experiences. The one thing you have to learn about therapy is that there's no such thing as a typical case, though you may see patterns, especially with certain populations. That could make things a little bit more scary, but I also think it makes things a little bit more free for both the therapist and the client. You have more control in this process than you think, and I would encourage you to advocate for what you want. If there was one thing I would like you to take away from this episode, is that you are not at the mercy of the professional. In my experience, therapists want feedback from the client. If things are working or not working, they want to know. A big part of therapy is what the industry calls finding the right fit. In later episodes, we'll get more into that. For now, though, I'll give 2 pieces of advice. Listen to your gut, and it is okay to be shallow. If you do not think that the therapist would be a good fit, you do not have to justify it. You do not even have to give a reason. Just call, say that you do not want to continue, lie about the reason if you want to, ask for referrals, or look for someone online. I will note, though, one thing, and that is the only exception for the client having all control in the therapy process is when there's a safety concern. If you are at risk of hurting yourself, if you wish to hurt someone else, or if a child is in danger, then the therapist, as a mandated reporter, has a legal obligation to tell someone. The person they have to tell will depend on the situation. It might be the police, it might be Child Protective Services, or it might be the person you wish to harm. Luckily, this does not happen often in private practice therapy. I never had a reason to call someone and tell them that my client wishes to harm them. For this episode, I'm hoping to relieve some of the anxiety you might have about going into therapy by essentially answering a question. Can I go to therapy? Later episodes will get into, should you go to therapy? I'll save you some time, though, and answer both these questions right now. The answer to both is yes. Now this question, can I go to therapy, may sound silly, but it comes up a lot. When I was in the school systems, there would be a child who had a problem, and the parents weren't sure if taking them to therapy was an overreaction. I have multiple answers to this question. The first is, I'm opposed to the concept of gatekeeping therapy in general. I think if you want help, that should be the end of it. This is also backed by how the mental health system works. If you are in the mental health world long enough, eventually you're going to encounter something called the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual 5th edition, also known as the DSM-5. It is a list of all mental health diagnoses that one could have according to the American Psychological Association, APA. The DSM has everything from generalized anxiety disorder, major depressive disorder, schizophrenia, substance use disorder, autism, ADHD. It goes on. The DSM lists all of the diagnoses, and it also lists all the various criteria that you must have to qualify for it. These criteria are measured usually by one of two things. The first is the emotion, feelings, or thoughts as reported by the client. Therapists usually take the client at their word. If the client says that they are having feelings of anxiety or depression, that is usually enough to get them a diagnosis for generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder. There is no need to prove any more than that. I mean, why would someone pay a therapist to waste their time and lie about having anxiety? In fact, in my experience, clients often underestimate the pain of their emotion. The second type of criteria you see with the DSM is observable behaviors. Just as one of the criteria for ADHD will be often climbs on things, or can't sit still. There is a lot of debate about what should or should not be in the DSM. And it's changed a lot from the DSM-1, published in 1952, to the DSM-5 that is still used today. We'll get more into the history of the DSM and changes in this episode, Should I Go to Therapy? But for right now, I want to focus on one major critique of the DSM, and that is almost anyone could find something that they have in the DSM. The DSM is large, it has a lot of diagnoses, and many of the criteria and diagnoses are surprisingly vague. I will give an example of a vague criteria. In the ADHD criteria, under hyperactive, one of the criteria is being overly talkative. Now I ask you, how much does a child need to talk to be considered overly talkative? The DSM does not give any more details. It is up to the professional. Now I understand why someone might not like the idea of having anyone be qualified, but I actually think this is a net positive because it allows anyone to seek help. And finding a diagnosis is important, for you need one to be covered by insurance. This also means that you do not have to hit rock bottom to go to therapy. In fact, it is preferred that you do not do that. Like a medical issue, the sooner you start the process of treatment, the easier it is to treat. If you are really unsure if you've qualified for a diagnosis, I want to turn your attention to something called adjustment disorder. In a nutshell, and I'm going to simplify things a bit, adjustment disorder is given to you if something within the last 3 months upset you significantly more than it should have and interrupted your life functioning. Now, if you were to say that is a very general, very open-ended diagnosis that almost anyone could fall under, I would agree with you. Adjustment disorder has been criticized for being used too frequently, and I have known therapists who have thrown it down and call it a day. I understand that critique. I do have respect for that argument, but I disagree, because it will often help the therapist put something down for the first session. One session is often not enough to see the patterns that could qualify for a more specific and appropriate diagnosis. So a lot of the times, and I'm guilty of this myself, for the first couple of sessions, a therapist will use adjustment disorder, then change it later. And it's not a lie. I'm not doing insurance fraud. There was something, typically within the last couple of months of the client's life, that upset them or caused disruption in their life. They do qualify. Other diagnoses that are used in such cases can be other specified or unspecified diagnoses. And they are exactly as they sound. Categories used when someone doesn't fit a precise diagnosis, but systems are still present and support is needed. So why it's technically possible to not have a diagnosis? The system is designed to make that very unlikely. I can tell you I have never had a client who did not qualify, nor have I ever heard of it happening. That includes the first episode of So You're Thinking About Therapy. I hope you found it helpful, and that it relieved some of the anxiety around this decision. Next, I will tackle the question, should you go to therapy? If this helped, consider subscribing for the next episode or sharing this with someone considering therapy. Good luck on your mental health journey.